September 19th, 1944. Near the French village of Arracourt, the world has dissolved into a dense, wet fog. For the American tankers of the 37th Tank Battalion, visibility is less than 100 meters. Sound is muffled, distorted. It's a ghost's world, and in it, ghosts are hunting them. First Lieutenant Merwin Mellon, perched in the commander's hatch of his M4 Sherman, can feel the tension coiling in his gut. His gunner, hunched over his periscope, scans the gray void. The warning had been stark. Panthers are in the area. To an American tanker in 1944, the word Panther wasn't just the name of a tank. It was a death sentence. A 45-ton Predator with sloping armor that shrugged off their 75mm shells like raindrops, and a long, high-velocity cannon that could gut a Sherman from a mile away. To face one frontally was suicide. Suddenly, a shape resolves out of the mist. A long gun barrel, a wide predatory mantlet, the unmistakable silhouette of a Panzer V Panther. It's close. Terrifyingly close. 75 meters. At this range, there is no time for tactics, no time for maneuvering. It's a duel of reflexes. The American gunner traverses, aims for the thickest part of the enemy turret, and fires. A flash, a roar, and then the impossible happens. The Panther, the invincible beast of Normandy, doesn't just stop, it detonates. A catastrophic explosion rips through its hull, lifting the 17-ton turret clean off its race and sending a pillar of fire and smoke into the morning fog. For the German crews watching from the mist, it was as if they'd witnessed a violation of the laws of physics. Their fortress had been breached, their invulnerability shattered. How? The answer lay in 6 rounds of ammunition tucked away in Lieutenant Mellon's Sherman. 6 rounds that looked no different from the others, but which contained a secret forged in the desperate laboratories of American ordnance. This is not simply the story of a better shell. This is the story of a historical domino effect. It's the story of how a few kilograms of a rare metal, fired at extreme velocity, didn't just punch through steel, it punched a hole through a myth. A myth of technological supremacy that had paralyzed Allied tankers and emboldened the German Panzerwaffe. The defeat of the Panther was not the work of a single silver bullet, but a cascade of failure triggered by one unexpected breakthrough. This is the story of how a piece of tungsten unlocked a new kind of warfare, proving that the greatest weapon isn't superior armor or a bigger gun, but the tactical doctrine and industrial will that a single technological key can unleash. To understand the sheer, earth-shattering shock of a Panther exploding at the hands of a Sherman, we have to rewind. We have to go back to the summer of 1944, to the bloody hedgerows of Normandy, and understand the myth that held the American armored forces in a grip of fear. The myth of the German supertanks. By 1944, Germany had been forced onto the strategic defensive. Beaten back in Russia and North Africa, facing an imminent invasion of France, their doctrine shifted. Unable to match the Allies in sheer numbers, they would rely on quality. They would build armored Predators so powerful, so technologically superior, that they could defeat multiple Allied tanks before being overcome. The apex of this philosophy was the Panzer V, the Panther. It was, on paper, arguably the finest medium tank of the Second World War. Imagine you are an American GI, seeing one for the first time. It doesn't look like the boxy tanks you're used to. Its front is a single, massive, sharply angled plate of 80mm steel. This glacis plate, sloped at 55 degrees, created an effective thickness of nearly 140 millimeters. It was a geometric fortress, designed to make shells glance off into the sky. And mounted in its turret was the weapon that haunted the dreams of every Allied soldier, the 7.5 mm KUK-42, a long, elegant, brutally efficient cannon that fired a small, dense projectile at velocities the Allies could barely comprehend. It could kill a Sherman from 2,000 meters, long before the Sherman was even in range to fire back. The American workhorse, the M4 Sherman, was a product of a different philosophy entirely. It was designed for reliability, for ease of mass production, and for infantry support. Its main weapon, the 75 mm M3 gun, was a fantastic all-around weapon for firing high-explosive shells at machine gun nests and bunkers. But against a Panther's frontal armor, it was a pea shooter, at any range. A Sherman could fire its entire ammunition load at a Panther's front, and all it would do is scratch the paint. The GIs had a grim nickname for their own tank, the Ronson lighter, after the popular cigarette lighter's slogan, "Lights up the first time, every time." Post-war analysis would show this reputation was statistically exaggerated. But in the thick of combat, perception is reality. And the reality for Sherman crews in Normandy was terrifying. They were forced into desperate, often suicidal flanking maneuvers, trying to get a shot at the Panther's thinner side armor while its lethal main guns swiveled to meet them. The problem wasn't that the Americans were unaware of the threat. The problem was a catastrophic failure of intelligence and a deep-seated institutional arrogance. Pre-invasion intelligence reports predicted the Allies would face a handful of these supertanks, suggesting the bulk of the German force would still be the older, more vulnerable Panzer IV. They were tragically wrong. By June of 1944, nearly 40% of the German tanks in France were Panthers. Hundreds of them. Worse, the American military command had been assured that a solution was already in hand. The new, higher-velocity 76 mm M1 gun. M4 Shermans equipped with this more powerful cannon had been rolling off production lines since January 1944. Hundreds were sitting in depots in Britain, ready for the invasion. Yet, in a decision that would cost countless lives, the American High Command, including figures like General George S. Patton, refused to deploy them for D-Day. The reasons were a cocktail of logistical caution and misplaced confidence. They worried about supplying two different types of ammunition, 75 mm and 76 mm, on the chaotic beachheads. They cited a lack of crew training time on the new weapon. But the most critical error was the belief, passed down from the Ordnance Department, that the standard 75 mm gun would be adequate. This assumption shattered within weeks of the landings. The hedgerows of Normandy became a slaughterhouse. Reports flooded up the chain of command, telling a grim, repetitive story. Shermans encountering Panthers and being systematically destroyed. On July 2nd, the complaints reached the desk of the Supreme Allied Commander himself, General Dwight D. Eisenhower. His reaction, recorded by those present, was one of pure fury. "You mean our 76 won't knock these Panthers out?" he raged. "Why, I thought it was going to be the wonder gun of the war. Ordnance told me it would take care of anything the Germans had." A board was hastily convened on July 12th. Its conclusion was blunt and official. Standard American weapons could not defeat a Panther frontally. The truth that tankers had been writing home in blood-stained letters was now an undeniable fact of military policy. General Omar Bradley gave the immediate order, rush the 76 mm Shermans from Britain to the front. On July 25th, during the massive breakout of Operation Cobra, the new 76 mm Shermans finally saw combat. The initial reports were sobering. The 76 mm gun was an improvement, yes, but it was not the promised wonder weapon. Using its standard M62 armor-piercing shell, It could penetrate about 109 millimeters of flat armor at 1,000 meters. This was enough to handle the older Panzer IVs, but against the Panther's sloped glacis, it was still largely ineffective. The only reliable frontal weak point was the gun mantlet, the thick, curved piece of armor around the cannon itself. But even that could only be penetrated at point-blank range, typically under 100 meters. Getting that close to a Panther was a death wish. The American armored forces were trapped. They had a tank that couldn't win a frontal fight, facing an enemy designed for exactly that. The myth of the Panther seemed not just true, but unbreakable. The stage was set for a disaster. But deep within the laboratories and proving grounds of the United States, a small group of engineers was working on a solution that had less to do with bigger guns and everything to do with physics. The solution to the Panther problem wasn't a bigger explosion or a larger cannon. It was a matter of metallurgy and velocity. The problem with conventional armor-piercing shells is that they are made of steel. When a steel projectile hits hardened steel armor at high speed, both deform. A huge amount of the projectile's energy is wasted in its own destruction. American ordnance engineers knew they needed a projectile that was far harder and denser than the armor it was hitting. The material they turned to was one of the hardest substances created by man: tungsten carbide. The concept was brilliantly simple in theory, but fiendishly complex in practice. They designed a new type of ammunition called high-velocity armor-piercing, or HVAP. The projectile, designated the T4 round, wasn't a solid piece of steel. Instead, it was a composite dart. At its heart was a core of tungsten carbide. This core was the actual penetrator, small in diameter but incredibly dense. Surrounding this core was a lightweight pot, or carrier, made of aluminum. The entire assembly was capped with a ballistic windshield to make it more aerodynamic. The design was revolutionary. By using the lightweight aluminum body, the overall weight of the projectile was significantly reduced. According to the fundamental law of physics, kinetic energy equals 1/2 mass times velocity squared. A lighter projectile could be fired from the same gun at a much, much higher speed. The results were staggering. The standard M62 shell from a 76mm gun left the barrel at 792 meters per second. The new M93 HVAP round, as it was later standardized, screamed out of the muzzle at 1,036 meters per second. That extra 204 meters per second made a world of difference. All that kinetic energy was now concentrated on the tiny, hyper-dense tungsten carbide tip. When this dart struck armor, the soft aluminum carrier disintegrated, leaving the tungsten core to punch through the steel plate like a needle through cloth. Testing data confirmed its power. At 900 meters, the HVAP round could penetrate 160 millimeters of armor plate. Suddenly, the Panther's gun mantlet, that 100 to 120 millimeter thick slab of curved steel, was no longer a point-blank only target. It was a viable target at up to 1,000 meters. For a Sherman crew, this changed everything. They no longer had to pray for a flank shot. They had a fighting chance, frontally. They had a key that could unlock the Panther's fortress. But forging the key was only half the battle. Now, they had to produce it. And here, the American war machine ran headlong into a wall of global geopolitics and resource scarcity. The magic ingredient, tungsten, was a strategic material of the highest order. It was essential for hardening steel, for making machine tools that cut the parts for every engine, every rifle, every piece of war equipment. And the world's primary source? China. Before the war, China produced over 1/3 of the global supply. Now, Shipping lanes were treacherous and supplies were precarious. The United States had some domestic deposits in Colorado, Nevada, and California, but it was not nearly enough. Every branch of the military, every war industry, was screaming for tungsten. The demand was insatiable. Each 7 contained nearly a kilogram of tungsten carbide. A single Sherman, carrying its authorized load of just 6 rounds, represented almost 5 kilograms of this precious, strategic metal. Production began at a crawl. In July 1944, as the crisis in Normandy was reaching its peak, American factories produced a mere 1,000 rounds of 3-inch HVAP for tank destroyers. In August, the first 1,000 rounds of 76mm HVAP for Shermans rolled off the lines. 1,000 rounds for an entire army. It was a pittance. By November, monthly production ramped up to 5,000 rounds, then 7,000 by January 1945. But the demand always outstripped the supply. By February of 1945, months after its introduction, the average 76mm Sherman in Europe had received a grand total of 5 HVAP rounds. 5. An entire company of 17 Shermans might have 85 of these precious rounds between them, while facing a German unit fielding 30 or more Panthers. This scarcity set the stage for a collision of forces in the autumn of 1944. General George Patton's Third Army had broken out of Normandy and was racing across France, its supply lines stretched to the breaking point. One of his spearhead units, the formidable 4th Armored Division, had seized a critical bridgehead over the Moselle River near the town of Arracourt. The German High Command saw both a threat and an opportunity. If Patton crossed the Rhine, the industrial heartland of Germany itself would be exposed. They ordered a massive counterattack to annihilate the bridgehead, led by General Hasso von Manteuffel's 5th Panzer Army. For this crucial attack, the Germans assembled 2 newly formed panzer brigades, the 111th and 113th. Their primary weapon was the Panther, fresh from the factory. Many were crewed by inexperienced soldiers, rushed through training, but their confidence was high. They were told their armor was invincible. On paper, the German advantage was overwhelming. They fielded nearly 150 tanks against roughly 50 Shermans of Combat Command A. German planners anticipated a swift, brutal victory, a textbook demonstration of technological superiority. They were about to drive headfirst into an ambush prepared by veteran American tankers, concealed by a blanket of fog, and armed with just enough tungsten to change the course of the war. The turning point was at hand. The morning of September 19, 1944, was born in thick fog. For the German panzer brigades, it was a curse, lacking proper reconnaissance units and with visibility reduced to a stone's throw. They advanced blind. Their new Panthers, crewed by men who had only weeks of training, lumbered forward in simple column formation, a rookie mistake, a textbook example of what not to do. For the Americans of the 4th Armored Division, the fog was a gift. They were veterans. They knew this terrain, and they had spent the night digging in, creating a web of interlocking defensive positions. Captain Kenneth Lameson's C Company, 37th Tank Battalion, was waiting. His crews had been briefed on the new ammunition. 6 rounds per tank. The message was clear. Use them wisely. Aim for the turret, aim for the mantlet, and don't waste a single shot. The fog that blinded the Germans acted as the perfect camouflage for the Americans. At around 8:00 a.m., the battle began. A platoon of Lameson's Shermans heard the telltale clank and diesel groan of approaching panzers. And then, out of the gray wall, the first Panther materialized. It was just 75 meters away. In a long-range gunnery duel, the Panther would win every time. But here, in this foggy cauldron, its primary advantage was nullified. The American gunner didn't hesitate. He fired. The HVAP round, traveling at over a kilometer per second, struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The tungsten core didn't bounce. It didn't shatter. It punched through the thick, curved cast steel as if it were cheese. Inside the turret, the round continued its trajectory, striking the ready ammunition stored directly behind the gun breech. The result was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The Panther's own shells detonated, blowing the turret off the hull in a geyser of flame. Before the shocked crews of the other German tanks could react, 2 more Panthers emerged from the mist. Within seconds, both suffered the same fate. 3 of Germany's most advanced tanks, destroyed in less than a minute by what they had been told were inferior opponents. The surviving German panzers, their crews stunned and confused by the sudden, violent loss of their comrades, broke off the attack and retreated back into the fog. This same scene was repeated across the Arracourt sector all morning. American Shermans, using the fog as their shield, engaged Panthers at close ranges where the HVAP rounds were devastatingly effective. Near the American command post, a platoon of M18 Hellcat tank destroyers, lightly armored but fast, and also equipped with 76mm guns and HVAP, joined the fray, darting in and out of the mist, killing panzers and disappearing again. The German tactical plan, so confident on paper, completely disintegrated in practice. Advancing in columns without reconnaissance, they repeatedly exposed their thin side armor to American tanks lying in wait. By noon, the fog began to lift, and for the Germans, things went from bad to worse. Now, American forward artillery observers could see the battlefield, and a rain of high-explosive shells began to fall on the disorganized panzer formations. Then came the sound that German soldiers had learned to dread above all others: the roar of Allison engines. P-47 Thunderbolt fighter bombers of the 405th Fighter Group swooped down through the clouds, strafing the panzers with 50 caliber machine guns and blasting them with rockets. The Battle of Arracourt became a perfect, brutal demonstration of the American way of war. The Panther was, tank for tank, a superior weapon system. But warfare is not a one-on-one duel fought according to technical specifications. It is a battle of systems. The Germans had sent their superior tanks into battle alone. The Americans met them with an integrated system of combined arms: tanks, tank destroyers, infantry, artillery, and air power, all working in concert. The HVAP round was the final, critical piece of that system. It did not make the Sherman the Panther's equal. What it did was give the Sherman crew a vital tool, a way to fight back, a way to contribute to the kill. It gave them a chance to exploit the vulnerabilities that every tank possesses: the gun mantlet, the turret ring, the side armor, at ranges that were previously suicidal. But the most devastating damage done that day was not to German steel, but to German morale. This was the twist. The true power of the HVAP round was psychological. Panther crews had been indoctrinated with the belief in their own invulnerability. Keep your front to the enemy, they were told, and you cannot be harmed. The survivors of Arracourt carried a terrifying new truth back to their units: the Americans can kill us now, even from the front. German reports from the battle were a mess of confusion and disbelief. Commanders radioed headquarters claiming the Americans must be using secret new 90mm guns. Others insisted the British must have supplied their deadly 17-pounder Firefly tanks. The truth, that American industry had solved the armor problem with a specialized shell, was, in a way, even more terrifying. It meant that America's industrial might could react to battlefield problems and produce technological solutions faster than Germany could counter them. It wasn't just that the Americans had more tanks. Their tanks were now getting smarter, their ammunition more lethal. The battle raged for 11 days. When the smoke cleared, the results were staggering. The Americans had lost 25 Shermans and 7 tank destroyers. The Germans had lost or had disabled some 86 tanks and assault guns. The 113th Panzer Brigade, which started the battle with nearly 90 armored vehicles, could muster fewer than 20 by the end. Arracourt was more than a tactical victory. It was a psychological watershed. The ripple effect of those first few HVAP rounds began to spread across the entire front. For the Americans, the myth of the Invincible Panther was broken. For the Germans, the chilling realization began to set in that their technological edge, their last great hope, was beginning to disappear. The legacy of Arracourt rippled outwards, changing the very texture of armored combat on the Western Front. For American tank crews, the psychological paralysis that had plagued them since Normandy began to lift. The knowledge that they possessed a weapon, even a very scarce weapon, that could defeat a Panther frontally, transformed their mindset. A crew that believes it can win will fight more aggressively, take calculated risks, and seize the initiative. A crew that believes it is outmatched will hesitate, and hesitation in a tank battle is fatal. The HVAP round, even for crews who had never fired one, became a symbol of hope, a talisman against the fear of the Panther. This newfound confidence was desperately needed. In December 1944, the Germans launched their last great offensive of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. Hundreds of Panthers and massive Tiger II tanks smashed into the American lines in the Ardennes forest. Winter weather grounded the Allied Air Force, nullifying one of America's greatest advantages. In the brutal, snow-choked forests, it once again came down to tank versus tank. American Sherman crews relied heavily on their tiny stockpiles of WWII. The shortage became critical. Within days, some units had fired all their tungsten-cored rounds and sent frantic requests for resupply, requests that often went unanswered as logistics networks broke down under the German onslaught. Yet even here, the lessons of Arracourt held. American forces, though reeling, did not break. They demonstrated that tactical skill and combined arms could still win the day. Tank crews worked hand in glove with infantry bazooka teams. Artillery observers called down devastating, time-on-target barrages that, even if they didn't penetrate armor, would shatter optics, break tracks, and kill exposed German commanders. When the weather finally broke, the fighter-bombers returned with a vengeance. The German offensive stalled and then collapsed, having lost hundreds of irreplaceable tanks and veteran crews. Their armored fist was shattered for good. As Allied armies pushed into Germany in early 1945, the strategic picture had changed completely. Germany's industrial capacity was collapsing under a relentless strategic bombing campaign. Fuel shortages were so severe that brand-new Panthers were often abandoned not due to combat damage, but simply because they had run out of gasoline. Post-war analysis of the HVAP round provided a more nuanced picture of its performance. It confirmed what crews learned in combat. It was highly effective against the Panther's turret and mantlet, but largely useless against the heavily sloped glacis plate. The brittle tungsten core had a tendency to shatter on impact against such an extreme angle, especially at longer ranges where its velocity had decreased. It was not a magic bullet. It did not make the Sherman a supertank. What it did was force a change in tactics. American gunners were trained to aim specifically for the mantlet, a more difficult but now rewarding target. The round rewarded skill and precision, and it gave crews a viable option where before there had been none. Perhaps the greatest vindication of the 76mm Sherman and its HVAP ammunition came not in the forests of Europe, but 5 years later, on the Korean peninsula. When North Korea invaded the South in 1950, American M4A3E8 EZ-8 Shermans, an improved model with a better suspension and the 76mm gun, were sent to face Soviet-supplied T-34-85 tanks. In World War II, HVAP had been a rare commodity. By 1950, tungsten supplies were plentiful. American Shermans in Korea carried full loadouts of HVAP. The results were decisive. The T-34-85, while a capable tank, had armor that was significantly inferior to the Panther. The American 76mm guns firing HVAP cut through them with ease. Thanks to superior crew training and the now plentiful supply of tungsten-cored ammunition, American Shermans achieved incredibly favorable kill ratios against their communist adversaries. For the veterans of Normandy and the Ardennes, it was a bittersweet victory. The ammunition that could have saved so many lives in Europe, had it been available in quantity, had finally proven its overwhelming effectiveness on another continent. The ripple effect of that first shot in the fog at Arracourt was still being felt, half a world and half a decade away. When we zoom out from the mud and fire of the battlefield, the story of the HVAP round becomes a timeless lesson about warfare, technology, and human ingenuity. It's a story whose legacy is etched into the very design of the tanks that patrol our world today. The human legacy is perhaps the most direct. A young lieutenant colonel who commanded the 37th Tank Battalion with incredible distinction at the Battle of Arracourt was a man named Creighton Abrams. The lessons Abrams learned in that battle about the absolute necessity of combined arms, the critical importance of crew training, and the game-changing impact of effective ammunition would shape his entire career. He rose through the ranks to become the Chief of Staff of the United States Army, and the doctrine he championed, forged in battles like Arracourt, became the foundation of the modern American military. It is no coincidence that America's premier main battle tank, a machine designed from the ground up to dominate through superior training, tactics, and firepower, is named the M1 Abrams. On the other side, German veterans who survived the war and later joined the new West German Bundeswehr carried their own hard-won lessons. They had experienced firsthand the futility of possessing a technologically superior weapon without the logistics, training, and industrial base to support it. Their influence on Cold War German tank design, like the Leopard 1 and Leopard 2, emphasized a balance of firepower, mobility, and protection, but with a deep institutional understanding that the quality of the ammunition and the skill of the crew were just as important as the thickness of the armor. The technological legacy is just as profound. The M93 HVAP round was a direct ancestor of all modern anti-tank ammunition. The underlying principle, concentrating immense kinetic energy into a small, incredibly dense, sub-caliber projectile, is the exact same principle behind today's armor-piercing, fin-stabilized, discarding sabot, or APF-SDS rounds. These modern, long-rod penetrators, fired from smoothbore cannons at hypersonic speeds, are made of tungsten alloy or depleted uranium, materials chosen for the same properties of density and hardness that made the HVAP round so effective in 1944. The family tree of anti-tank technology has its definitive roots in the desperate race to solve the Panther problem. So what is the final, universal lesson from that foggy morning at Arracourt? It is the profound truth that there is no such thing as a wonder weapon. The Panther was a magnificent piece of engineering, a tank that inspired terror, but it was defeated. It was defeated not by a single miraculous counterweapon, but by a superior system. A system that integrated technology like the HVAP round, with better training, more flexible tactics, overwhelming logistical support, and complete control of the sky. The tungsten cored shell was not a battering ram that smashed down the door of the German fortress. It was a key. A small, precisely engineered key that, in the hands of a skilled and determined soldier, could unlock that fortress from within. It shattered the psychological armor of invincibility that protected the Panther as much as its steel plate. It gave the American tanker the confidence to close with the enemy, to aim for the weak point, and to fight on more equal terms. The story of the Sherman versus the Panther is a stark reminder that military history is not a simple game of statistics on a data sheet. It is a complex, human drama where industrial capacity, strategic resources, battlefield experience, and sheer courage all weigh on the scales of victory. The few precious HVAP rounds that reached the front in 1944 were a testament to the power of science and industry to solve an urgent tactical problem. But the victory they enabled was a testament to the enduring power of a doctrine that understood that wars are won not by the best machine, but by the best integrated team. If you found this deep dive into the hidden history of armored warfare fascinating, please take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories that challenge the myths of history. The battlefields of the Second World War are filled with tales like this, where a single innovation or a forgotten battle changed everything. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What other myth-busting stories from history deserve a closer look? Thank you for watching.